and welcome to another episode of the Economic Times Cutting Chai Stories, an initiative by ETH powered by Kyndryl. I'm Ashwani Mishra, bringing to you conversations with business leaders as they share their personal and professional journey over the years, their insights on leadership, their hobbies, and other such engaging topics. Joining me today is Daisy Chitilapilli, who in a corporate avatar is the president at Cisco India and SAARC, and in a current role, she is responsible for strategy and sales, operations, and investments to drive long-term growth for the company in the region. Welcome, Daisy, on Cutting Chai Stories.
Thank you very much, Ashwani. Thank you for having me.
Let's rewind a little and go back in time, Daisy. You did your BTech from College of Engineering, Trivandrum, Thiruvananthapuram, as it is called now. If you were to go back to the years of your childhood, school or college, which positive influences or incidents shaped your foundation during these formative years?
I think, and a lot of women in my generation, maybe even girls who grew up in small towns, I think Trivandrum, Thiruvananthapuram is still not a big metro city, right? Still fairly much smaller and much slower pace of life. And you can imagine as a child growing up there in the 80s, as a girl child growing up in the 80s, one of the most important things that can happen for you is a sense of confidence and independence that gets instilled in you when you're very young. And
True.
That happens because your parents do it, and they don't do it through sermonizing or giving you long lessons, but they just expose you to experiences which then instill that behavior in you. So I think I have to say, I'm for a lot of children, the earliest role models are their parents, and my parents fortunately did not. I'll be honest in saying I did have gender stereotyped roles at home. But
Right.
when it came to these two qualities of independence and confidence, they always gave me things to do that not many children or any children of that age were doing at that time, like 12 or 13, going to a bank and withdrawing money, getting on a bus. These were the days when households used to withdraw money once a month from the bank for the whole month. So they would send me off with a check. I'd get on a city bus, travel 5-6 kilometers, get off, cross a main road, which was busy by Trivandrum standards, get money, hop back on the bus, come back, do things like this, which was not typical for a 11, 12-year-old girl child to do. There was no money in it, but I did have my own bank account too, right?
Right.
Never any money in it, but you did carry your own passbook. You just got used to this banking ecosystem at 12, 13 years old, which actually, when I look around myself today, also it's not a lot of kids who do that at that age. So this concept of independence and this concept of confidence, just nurtured through childhood experiences, I think was very important. And I gave you this example, but many such little things. And then the people you get exposed to, right? And first it's your parents, then you go to school and you see either you get influenced by, and then I had the benefit of having neighbors who I consider a second set of parents, who had a very diverse background from that of my parents, right? He was he was a private secretary to the then chief minister of the state. His
Right.
wife was a very, very accomplished woman herself. She was joint secretary in the government, so she was a role model. And her brother was both Kendra Sahitya Academy winning and Kerala Sahitya Academy winning novelist. So, when you grow up exposed to people like this, we are all products of our exposures and experiences. So, you see, we are a middle class family, but you see a set of people who have broken many glass ceilings, who are doing very different things, who are not, who don't toe the line of a very secure government employment. In Kerala, government employment is the definition of security at that time, but they are doing different things, right? Writing novels, being a political party activist, etc. So you get exposed to people who are very different, and from all of them you learn this subconsciously or consciously. And they were my reading library. Those were the days when children did not have access to a lot of books, but they did. And I used to read there was no dearth of any kind of book you wanted to read, so I would read their library, and I would read the school library. We didn't have, I'll be transparent, very limited books in my house, but I had two libraries, one in the school and one at their house.
House, right.
So I used to read a bunch of stuff that were probably not age appropriate either, maybe if my parents knew what I was reading. But you know, it was a wonderful world because you also, it's the reason I still read a little bit today, because you don't have to learn everything through your own experiences, right? You can learn a lot about the world and about people by reading and through the experiences of others, even fictional characters. So yeah, so all of that was formative experience. I think school was a very formative experience as well. I went to an all-girls school, and that can typically be considered convent all-girls school. And typically, you can consider that as a little regressive, but it's not, because at least for me, in my personal stories, you could be anything. You could be captain of the team, you could be captain of school, you could stand up and on stage and debate. So you didn't conform to any gender roles
Particular
at
subject.
school, right?
Right. Interesting, Daisy. So those formative years, there were lots of learnings that you've shared. Interesting ones, going to the bank, traveling in the bus alone. My next question was, directed towards: did you always want to pursue a career in technology?
My parents were probably too happy-go-lucky for a set of parents, right? They never wanted me. I have a sibling, a younger brother. They never told us you have to become this or you have to become that. And that was very less pressure, because even now perhaps, but certainly at the time, if you were good in academics, then you went off and became a doctor and an engineer, and then if you were really, really good, you would go into the civil services, right? That's the line of thinking. But my parents never put any such goals in front of us. I always saw myself in STEM. So my plan when I was in high school, when I was in 11th, 12th grade, was to go off and do a doctorate in physics. That is what I thought I would do. But I actually went and did my engineering entrance because one of the nuns in the convent school I was going to, who I deeply respected, who I'd seen from the time I was a second grader,
Right.
It's even now and definitely back then, the prestige of schools is based on how many of the children get into a professional college, right? Who goes to the colleges, where the medical college or engineering college, that certainly lifts the school a little bit. I was a decent student, so I was their hopeful, one of their hopefuls. And so when she asked me, you're all preparing, right? You're doing this the right way. I said, no, but I have no interest in this. And this is in the 12th grade, 12th standard. And I said, I think I'm going to go do physics. And I don't even want to write these entrance exams because I don't
Right.
have any intention in doing it. And her face literally fell. So as someone who had grown up in that system, who had deep respect for her, she just said, why don't you write it? You can always decide whether you want to pursue it or not. And so I went off on a whim and did that. Did the entrance exam. But by the time I got to the entrance exam, and then I saw a lot of the flurry around how important this was and how it could really change the trajectory of your life in India. And I said, maybe I should give it my best. And so when I came, it was a definite conscious choice to then not opt out once I did get in, and then to make the best of it. And once I got in, then, I went from construction to IT as an accident, Ashwini.
Okay.
First applied because when companies come to college, you get the first job, you sit out of the rest of the interviews. So the first company to recruit, to say they would recruit me, was this company called HCL, not the HCL today, but the other HCL, Hindustan Construction.
Construction, right?
Yeah. So they promised to send me an offer letter. They went off, and for a month they didn't do anything. And it so happened that Wipro came on campus, was the next company, and because I didn't have an offer letter in hand, serendipity, I went into the Wipro interview. I got recruited. So construction to IT happened like that. But fast forward a few years, the late 90s, everybody is joining the Indian software is hiring for Y2K readiness. Everybody I know in and around me is joining software. But at that point, and I'm a salesperson, right? Doing cold calls, knocking door to door at that time.
Right.
And everybody's advising me, saying that this is the new shiny toy. This is the industry that will go gangbusters. And if you didn't buy that, then they were telling you, these campuses are really cool. You can play basketball, you can go to the gym, etc. And then the third category, who knew I had this penchant for travel, telling me you'll definitely get posted in Europe or US. So, come over here. And everyone I know, my circle of influence, my friends, everyone's moving from wherever they are into software development, the big Indian software development houses. And I said, no, I like this. I had really learned to love sales by then. And I knew this is my calling. So perhaps the second intentional decision is at that point, right? When you decide to stand against the herd,
Right.
and you decide who you are and what you want to do and what makes you tick, and you make a career decision on something that is at the intersection of your interests and your capabilities. So very intentional decision to stay back, and of course, the threat of being underpaid versus even that, right, in the late
True.
90s,
Yes.
that is also
Yes.
a conversation, right? So an intentional decision. So I'd say two lessons from there. The first one is this: when someone gives you an advice which is different from what you think for yourself, just take it. There's no harm, and the choice is still yours. So the saying yes to opportunity is a mantra I learned when I made that decision to just take somebody's well-meant advice to go to that entrance exam. But
True.
it's a mantra that's followed me through. Even if someone gives me left field advice, as I call it, which I don't see for myself, I still think I should listen to it and give it a thorough look over, because you never know where that road can take you down to. And then the second one is the intentionality of knowing who you are and what will work for you. And that's what I learned from that experience in the 90s. I was still fairly young, still in my early 20s, when I made that call that I would stick in tech sales and stick here, rather than moving over to where everyone else was going at the time.
Very interesting thoughts, Daisy. So in a way, these were two of the turning points in your life where they have shaped up your career till date. In a way, yes.
Yeah.
Right. Just coming to the present scenario, Daisy. Over the last year and a half, we have seen businesses being disrupted across. What has this crisis meant for leaders like yourself? Has it changed your priorities as a leader, or otherwise affected the manner in which you lead? What have been some of the lessons that you've learned?
I think a few things, definitely. I mean, it's not that they were not important before the pandemic, Ashwini, but they've certainly been highlighted. I mean, before the pandemic, perhaps it it was appreciated, but after the pandemic, I think it will be a necessity for a leader. That's the way I would point a few of these things. The first is, we talk about putting people first, but companies and teams that did not put people first really struggled in the during the COVID phase to keep their businesses at the highest level of competence and competitiveness, right? So that's
True.
definitely one thing. So putting people first, most businesses have realized that if you don't take care of your people, which means that you don't have a very conscious culture where you make people feel valued, make people feel included, then whatever else you do, you're not going to be able to. And the biggest thing about COVID also and post-COVID world will be the focus for most companies to differentiate themselves on this idea of customer experience.
Customer experience. True. Yes.
And ultimately, your people are the people from whom your ultimate customers experience this experience, right? So I think this consciousness around people and the focus on people, it was always important, but it's come back as a critical survival skill when you get disrupted or when you face a disruption, right? And the culture, your people culture and your organizational culture, which is the manifestation of your people's strength at scale, is definitely something that we've always been I've certainly been very conscious of, but I think it's come home to us in many more new ways during the pandemic. The second, again, is a cliche. We've always said you must unlearn, relearn. You've said all this before.
Right.
But the speed at which you have to unlearn, right? Everything that you've known in the first, now I've worked 2.5 decades plus, and to unlearn things that you have perhaps taken as the non-negotiables or things that will not get questioned even in a career of that size, or even in careers which are much shorter. So this unlearning has become a critical skill, and this ability to put yourself in discomfort because of unlearning is, I think, a necessary skill for everybody, but particularly for a leader.
True.
And the other two things, that pretty much the two sides of the same coin, is the ability to make decisions with far less data, and the change agility that is required in people across the board, but leaders in particular, right? So course correction and change agility, you have to have high change agility to be able to unlearn and relearn. And you also have to have high change agility to course correct. Because constantly in a, during a disruption like the pandemic, and this will not be the last one, you can't wait for all the data and get going on a set path, which you're always pursuing for a long period of time. So this fail fast and things like fail fast, which used to be great academic phrases, these have again come home to us in much more meaningful fashion. But probably the mental strength, the grit and the resilience, which is important always again for leaders, but very important to do that because this degree of change is difficult to lead for as a leader who knows the answers, but you're also at the receiving end of this amount of change, right? So you have more questions at a personal level, you have more questions than answers, but at the same time, you have to lead your team through this very high degree of change and very high volatile and uncertain environment. So the degree of mental strength and grit and resilience that leaders need is at an all-time high. And I think as leaders, people are also, leaders are highly successful people. So yes. when you work in this environment, success is not guaranteed. And so how you respond to failure and more failure is something that, because leaders are successful people, they followed a template, they're constantly being given jobs and roles because there's great confidence that they will make things happen. But a situation in which you will probably have to prepare for a higher degree of failure, and how you take it on your, how you deal with it, and therefore how you manifest it within your own teams is another one as well. So lots of things, none of it is rocket science, none of it is unknown, but the degree to which the pandemic has taught us about the importance of these skills or characteristics, I think is important. And I think the last one, you have to be human. In the morning you're in a business review. An hour from then, you are talking to a team member who is desperately looking for an ICU bed or
right. So that touch of empathy is very yes.
I will push it from empathy to compassion.
Compassion, yes.
Leading with compassion. So we all know about empathy, but leading with compassion has become and leaders who can do that, it's a strength. And I don't think leading with compassion is going to go out of fashion. Yes. Because of that focus on, everyone wants a leader who they are not afraid to be vulnerable with and share their deepest, darkest fears and concerns about. And they will only do it if the leader also displays that they can be vulnerable. You cannot be an ivory tower leader and expect your people are going to put their hearts on their sleeves. And if you want truly conscious, inclusive cultures, you need that communication channel open. And making mistakes, leading with compassion doesn't mean that you will not be hard-nosed when it comes to the business metrics or success. So that balance is very, very important as well, right? So people can over-rotate into the, you can't over-rotate into the compassionate mode always because you have a business to run. And they have a business to run at their individual levels as well. So it's a balancing act all around. But I think the power of leading with compassion and empathy is also something I think front and center with people is probably the biggest shift. I think it's here to stay.
Right. Very interesting insights, Daisy. So keeping people first, showing that being compassionate, having the ability to unlearn and learn quickly and be agile. So some of the key views that you put across. Now, with the ongoing digital transformation again across sectors, the relevance of effective mentorship has also elevated during this time. You are passionate about mentoring and especially the youth to pursue more opportunities in technology. Could you throw some insights on what you have been doing on this front and what can leaders do more around it? So, so that we have more youth into this field.
So I think I have, of course, at Cisco, we have a lot of conversations around mentoring and around reverse mentoring also, right? Which means that someone much younger than you
Yes.
See, this mentorship is always assigned, is always thought of as something where somebody is senior in grade, senior in experience, and then they are giving all their wisdom down to a bunch of people. That's, preaching from the top of Mount Sinai. That's not the way this works, actually, right? So I think in my mentor conversations or mentorship conversations, I am a mentor and a mentee in most conversations because I learn things, and that's the reason I'm interested as well. And I have been a mentor for the longest time because I think it's, while I might be the assigned mentor in that relationship, I am as much a mentee as been my learning through that process of many years. And you're constantly in this world where you're constantly learning and
Learning.
relearning and unlearning. Never underestimate the agility and the brilliance of younger minds who can teach you many a thing, right? So, and we do have, as leaders, we deal with a multi-generational workforce as well. So it's very important to stay agile in your mind about how do you interact and how do you identify and how do they identify with you as a leader. So it's a big part of that conversation, Ashwini. So at Cisco, we have a number of things, right? We have mentorship cohorts, we have reverse mentoring cohorts, we have many EROs, so employee resource groups. Of course, I'm a woman, so I get a lot of women who come to me just to make sure that, just to talk about what they're dealing with and whether I've had a similar experience or I'm aware of other people who have had a similar experience, point them to it. But the broadest one that I'd like to highlight in this conversation is an initiative that we are calling the Multiplier Pledge. And the Multiplier Pledge, you know Brian Stevenson, the African Americans' rights lawyer,
Right.
the
Yes.
inspiration behind the movie Just Mercy, who talks about this idea of proximity. And the idea of proximity, I find that very, very interesting because the idea of proximity is really about getting close to someone who is very different and diverse from you and whose experiences you've never had. But through their sharing of their experiences, you can really get to understand what that group goes through. Can be women, can be a minority, can be a different sexually oriented people. But when you get proximate to someone, different race, different caste, but when you get proximate to people like that, then you understand their life experiences and their issues on a day-to-day basis, which otherwise you never truly do understand.
And there is a need to highlight that, Daisy, so in a way, yes.
Yeah. So when you do that, the reason we call it the Multiplier Pledge is because then you take a pledge, and this is a self driven thing, right? It's not like anybody is asking you to do it. You can choose to do it or choose not to do it. But you take a pledge then to be an ally and a sponsor for that individual or set of individuals who are so different from you. It's a big part of creating that conscious, diverse, inclusive culture. And you can decide who you want to get proximate to. So, that's the one I would talk about the most because we've talked about mentorship in many contexts, but mentorship sometimes is, I'm a sales leader, I'll pick up the next bunch of salespeople and, it's usually a skill conversation. But I think mentorship is also about allyship and sponsorship, and that can be for people in a business, sure, and with a certain skill set, sure, but it can also be for groups of disenfranchised people who need not, who come from very different teams within your own organization or even come from outside.
True, yes.
So my external position is I'm particularly, as you might imagine, I'm particularly keen on making sure that I can help women in India. So my external interventions are all centered on women and startups. So those are the two places I think if they can see any value in me, not the vice versa, if they think they see any value in me, I never refuse a conversation externally in that space because I think we have a lot to go. Women in general, women in sales, women in startups. That's the ecosystem on which I'm sort of focused because as you could imagine, you can't have a broad spectrum and you can't talk to everybody. But
everyone.
Yeah.
So a final question before I wind up this conversation. What is the kind of legacy that you would like to build at Cisco?
I always look at I always look at everything I do, just not just at Cisco, but from an impact lens, Ashwini. And in the role I'm sitting in, obviously, the circle of influence, as you call it, is much broader than any other role I've done at Cisco before. But um, so the impact is obviously impact on the team for sure, because I am a people leader. Impact on the business because I'm a business leader. But I
Right.
am a business leader and an Indian doing business in India. So what is the impact that Cisco can create? I have the stewardship of a very powerful brand in India. And what does that mean? What can Cisco mean to India? So it's, what's the imprint we can leave on digital India? What's the imprint we can leave on the startup ecosystem in India? What's the imprint we can leave on the youth of India through our skilling and upskilling programs? What's the imprint we can leave on the, in all of the initiatives of the government which are involving the disenfranchised, which is why we have a focus on things like agri, healthcare, and so on, where healthcare and agri and education, where typically technology has not been used to solve problems at scale. So we're pushing the borders and boundaries of how we can bring tech to solve problems at scale, particular with a view to connecting everybody. So connecting people to resources, forging opportunities for everybody, right? Those are the two lenses that we look at when we look at the impact we can create with the communities that we do work with in India. So I think three lenses: the team, the business, and the country, the communities we're in.
Very well put across, Daisy. Really, thank you. Thank you for your time and sharing your story and your views. I stand immensely inspired through this conversation with you, and I'm sure our viewers will find the same. All the best, and it has been a pleasure speaking with you on Cutting Chai Stories.
Thank you very much, Ashwini, for having me. My pleasure being here.
Thank you.